Welcome to part 25 in this series of videos showing how to create a simple purchase order system using Blazor and C#. In this video, we'll be looking at sending emails using SendGrid. In my previous video, I mentioned that I was initially drawn to SendGrid for sending emails, but that for individuals I felt that MailKit had advantages. I still hold that view, and indeed I cannot really find fault with MailKit, but since I mentioned SendGrid, I thought I would include some code here that showed how to use SendGrid in place of MailKit. We've already done the hard work, so the process is going to be pretty simple. The steps required to swap to SendGrid are to create a SendGrid account, obtain an API key and configure SendGrid settings, in particular a verified user, install the SendGrid NuGet package in our C# project, add SendGrid and user parameters to appsettings.json, to create a service to use SendGrid, and lastly to modify the index page to call the SendGrid service in place of MailKit. First of all, we need to create a SendGrid account. So let's have a look at that. Once you've created a SendGrid account and signed in for the first time, you will be greeted by this screen. There are basically only two things we need to do. We need to create a single sender identity, and we need some API keys. So as it says here, we need to create a sender identity, and there are two ways of doing this, either a single sender or authenticator domain. We'll go for single sender as recommended here, just to get set up quickly. But for companies, you might like to consider using authenticator domain instead. Domain authentication is SendGrid's recommended verification method, but requires that you have a domain and are authorized to make changes to DNS records. From what I can see, there are two principal advantages of domain authentication. Firstly, any email address from the domain is automatically verified. And secondly, if you use just the single sender, the recipient of your emails will, as part of the from address, see a section that says via SendGrid. If you use domain authentication and link that with link branding as well, they won't see that in the from email address. So anyway, after that diversion, you then go to create single sender, and you're presented with this form, which simply requires a from name, such as your own name, John Smith, an email address, and a reply to address. And as it implies, this will send an email to that email address, and you'll need to verify it. It needs a company address and the so on and so forth. So it's all fairly straightforward, and a nickname, just so you know which email address you're using, and then click create. I'm going to skip that, but it's all fairly straightforward. If we go back to this screen, I should say that the single sender verification is also available down here under sender authentication, and this will also take you to the screen where you can create a single sender or use domain authentication. But the next thing we need to do is get an API key, and again that's equally simple. In all cases, just go to settings, API keys, and it's as simple as clicking the create API key. You need to give it a name. Again, that has no real significance other than for your benefit, and assign whether it's got full access, restricted access, or billing access. I have always gone for full access. I think that's probably the easiest. It means you won't get tripped up by any possible restrictions later on. Doesn't seem to have any disadvantages. So select that and click create in view. You'll then be presented with a screen with the API key on. Make sure you copy and paste that somewhere safe. And that's all there is to uh, creating an account and getting started with SendGrid. So we'll now turn our attention to the C# code. In C#, the first thing we need to do is install the SendGrid NuGet package. So this is the usual procedure: Tools, NuGet Package Manager, Manage NuGet Package for Solution. And if we look under Browse and type in SendGrid, it's the top one by Elmer Thomas that you want. So select that, tick the Blazor code, Blazor purchase order, and then click Install. And that's all there is to that. The next section is to have a look at app settings. Again, we've got some settings that we need to install in here. I've still got the MailKit ones here, but for SendGrid, we just need these lines of text in here. So it's got the SendGrid API key, the email address, and the email friendly name. So that can be your name or whatever. So that's done. The next thing is to create a SendGrid email service. So let me save that. And we do that under Data, and we want to create a new file, new class, and we'll call it email sender SendGrid. And I'm going to delete all the code that's in there and copy this code in. Right, now it follows the kind of pattern that we use for MailKit, but inevitably there are a few differences. I've included the public interface, and we're using the configuration facility here to read data from the appsettings.json. But the big difference here is we've got a public async task, which I've assigned as a Boolean. So we're going to be returning a Boolean from the send email, but passing into it will be our to email address, the subject and body. This is exactly the same as for MailKit. Then we've got the API key, which we're going to get from the app settings. The client is going to create again a new API key. Then we get the friendly name and the from email address from app settings, and add those to the email address object. Then we've got the text. I'm being very lazy here. I'm just, for simplicity, just using the body that's coming from the index page for both the plain text and the HTML. Then we create a message and then call this await client send email async with the message, and then configure await, and that says false on the end. And that's going to create a response. And what we're going to do is return the response is success status code. So that will either be true or false. So that will indicate whether this has succeeded or failed. Now, because this is a service, we need to add the service effectively declaration to the startup. So in startup, we need to add this statement. Whoops, something went wrong. Give myself a bit more space. So maybe I should have thought more carefully about what I was going to call these things when I started off, but I didn't. And I'm not going back to change things because the code already exists in previous videos. So that's really the hardest part of the whole job. The next thing we need to do is go to index, the index page, and we need to inject the email sender. So why don't I copy that? So that's the first thing we need to do here. The second thing is very straightforward. On the I'm missing it. On the toolbar click handler, on the email option, we simply substitute those two lines with that. If I comment out MailKit, so instead of having the email service send, we're awaiting the email sender dot send email, and again we're passing the same parameters into it, and we're using the same toast control that we used previously, and that's it. So if I save everything, we should be able to run it. I'll select my favorite order, click email, and we've got a problem. Right, I better see what it is. Well, it turned out that was an unintended demonstration of what happens if you don't get things set up correctly. And what I failed to do is in app settings, I'd left the SendGrid API key as just the placeholder and the email as just the placeholder. So off screen, I will now correct that and rerun it. But there's one thing I would mention while going through this, and that is that in the email sender, this line here, var client equals new SendGrid client API key, that should be left as API key. It's not the actual API key that we put in there. So just leave that as API key. That can be partially misleading. So I'll correct things and then we'll run the program. So off screen, I changed the email from the sender to Christopher Bell at Blazor code. So we've now got my favorite order. If we look at it, we'll see that we're going to email it to Christopher Bell at Blazor code. So we're going to be sending it to the same one as it came from, but I don't think that matters. So let's try sending it and see if we have any success this time. Yes, success. And if we look in Outlook, there it is. So it's come from Christopher Bell at Blazor code and it's gone to Christopher Bell at Blazor code, but that doesn't matter. So that's sending emails using SendGrid. As I say, the advantage of using MailKit is that you can use things like Gmail. SendGrid, you cannot send from a Gmail account, although you can of course send it to a Gmail account. So that wraps up this section. Thank you very much for watching. As usual, I'll put the code and links in the description, and if you've got any comments, please leave them in the comments section below. Thank you very much.